Hey everyone, welcome. This is xyOps. This is a workflow automation and server monitoring tool. And today I wanted to show you how to make a remote file processor and build it into xyOps. xyOps has all the building blocks you need for doing this, but it takes a little bit of effort to set it up exactly how you want it and configure how you want files to be picked up and processed. This is a really common operation that people have where files get dropped on a server somewhere, and you want to automatically watch that folder, pick up the files, delete them, and then go process them somewhere else, usually on a different server. So there's actually two different ways you can do this with xyOps, and I'll show you both. The first way to do it is to use our monitoring and alerting system in xyOps. The way this works is you set up a monitor plugin. The monitor plugin runs on any servers you want, any groups, and it can run a custom command every single minute. But instead of collecting stats or metrics for the monitoring system, it can actually just return a count of files in a folder. And that can be the output of the plugin and thus the output of the monitor. That feeds right into the alerting system. The alert can have an expression that says if count of files is greater than 0, fire the alert. And alerts can have actions attached to them. So whenever an alert fires, you can run a job. And in this case, we're going to run a file pickup job, which will run on the server that threw the alert. You can configure that automatically. And then it'll pick up the job and submit it or upload it to xyOps and delete it all in one fell swoop. And then that job will clear the alert really quick and pass off to another job for processing the file. The reason why you want to split this into two jobs, there's a number of reasons, but the main one is you want to separate these because you usually want to process the job on a separate server or a separate set of servers. And you can also control concurrency better this way because these jobs may want to run on multiple servers at once, depending on where the alerts fire, where the files show up. And this one you can set in a queue, so it only runs in series or in controlled concurrency up to, n threads, that kind of thing. So let's set this up and see how it's going to work. The first thing we're going to want to do is we're going to want to go over to our plugins, and you're going to want to create a new plugin that's a monitoring plugin. So you want to create a new plugin and you want to set it to be a monitor plugin. Monitor plugins run on each server. You can control which servers they run on by targeting by group. And you can also have it run a custom script. In this case, all we're going to do is we're going to count the number of files in a pickup directory, and we're going to pipe that output to wc-l to get the number of lines, in this case, the number of files. So we're basically just listing all the files, and we're piping that to a line counter. So it's going to return 0, 1, 2, or however many files it has. And that's the entire content of the monitor plugin. And we're going to set the output to text because it's not generating JSON or XML or anything else in this case. It's just plain text. And then when we actually write our alert to look at this value, we'll say there needs to be a number at that point. I'll show you that next. So you don't need to set anything else here. Just click save. And your monitor plugin's ready to run. And it's going to run every minute on every server. You can use this test button here to see what the current value is. And you can choose any of your servers to run it on. And you can basically drop a file and make sure that that number goes to 1 or whatever. And then back to 0 when the files are gone. That's what you should see. And just keep in mind that monitor plugins run once per minute on every server that's targeted by the server groups here. The next thing you want to do is set up an alert. Alert runs basically an expression or evaluates an expression against any of the server data that comes in from each of your servers and can basically trigger an action if that happens. So what you want to do is you want to create an alert. In this case, I'm calling it file counter. You want to target the same groups that the monitor plugin's running on, in this case, my Raspberry Pis. And here's the expression. The expression is just basically JavaScript format where you can basically point at a piece of data from the server monitoring system and then evaluate it. In this case, greater than 0 would generate an alert. If you're wondering about how to format this stuff, we have documentation on the syntax, but also you can explore the monitoring data from each of your servers and to see what the output looks like. You can see in the commands folder here, it's not really a folder, the commands branch of this data, we have IDs for each of the plugins. And then if you hover over the ID, you can see the plugin name. So you can see which one's which. And this helps you basically construct the path and the expression you want by putting pieces together and then basically writing your expression here. So we're saying if the output of this command, cast to an integer, is greater than 0, then fire the alert. And then we have a little message here that says there are number of files waiting for pickup. And we're using a macro to expand for that part. The other thing we want to do is we want to launch a job when the alert fires. And that's done here with the alert actions. So you can say when the alert fires, we want to run an event and then pick which event we want to run. And in this case, we want to run an event that's just going to grab the file, upload it, and delete it off that server. The key thing here to look at is when you're firing off this event, you want to select target alert server. This means that it's going to retarget this event wherever it was pointed at before, retarget it to point at the server that fired the alert. That's really important because there may only be one server in a group of 100 servers that actually has a file waiting. And so then the alert knows which one that was. So you want to target the event to run on that server. So that's what this does. And the other thing is when the job completes, when it grabs the file off the server, we want to clear the alert. And that's what this checkbox does. Normally, alerts will stay active for a full minute until their expression evaluates to false. In this case, we know that we're picking up the file and we know that it's deleted, so we're clearing the alert fast. That way, if another file gets dropped seconds after, it'll be able to trigger on the next minute. So it's just an inefficiency thing. So we have that set. The last thing I want to mention in here for setting up the alert is we have exclusive actions turned on. This means that you may have some universal or group-based actions that are set to run on all alerts. For example, alerts are usually for things like CPU high, memory low, disk space, that kind of thing. We have a bunch of regular stock alerts set for those sorts of actions. And those are typically things that you want to generate an email for or fire off a webhook. You may have a global action set for all alerts that send you an email, for example, or create a ticket, because those are usually things that need to be looked at. This is not that kind of alert. It's a good alert, right? It's an alert that means that a file is waiting to be processed. So if you do exclusive actions, it will not run any of the inherited actions that it normally does, all the default actions. So anything you have defined as a universal or a group-based action will not apply to this particular alert. It's only going to run the alert, the actions we have listed here. So it's only going to run this one job, and that's it. So what happens when the alert fires and it runs our job? Well, our job is an event, and it's set here in the regular event list, but it doesn't have a schedule. It's not going to run on hourly or a daily schedule. It just has a manual run trigger, so it's going to be an on-demand trigger when the alert fires in this case. So what this job is going to do is it's going to run on the server, and it's going to grab the files, either in the pickup directory, and it's going to upload them, delete them as well. You can see this is done with a single line of JSON that we're just printing the standard out. This is the entire job. That's all it needs to do. It's basically telling xyOps, we want you to upload any files in this directory, and here's a glob, and you can give it a glob of anything that you want to match. And we're saying delete true, so delete the files when you're done. And that's all we need to do. This will upload the files, and they become outputs to this job, which can then be piped to another job. I'll show you that in just a minute. Okay, so I've dropped some files into my pickup directory on my server, and we're going to wait till on the minute roll over here. It should automatically fire the monitor plugin, and the monitor plugin should grab an alert. Let's see what happens. There it goes. So we see we have an alert and a job running, and then instantly it's gone, right? That's because it just grabbed the files off the server, uploaded them, and then completed the job, and nothing else. Because we haven't set a follow-up job to run yet. That was just a test to make sure this worked. So let's take a look at what completed. You can see we have our job here that just completed called pickup files. And this is the event that the alert was wired into as an action. So when the alert triggered, this job ran. And it says, here's the server alerts. You can see that there's an alert that referenced this job. There are 5 files waiting for pickup, and that's the number of files I copied over there. And if you scroll down, you can see here are all the files. And it shows you all the files because these were attached to the output of the job. And you see we have a little slideshow. If they're images or videos, you can see what they look like. But now we've collected all the files. And what we can do is we can wire this up to another job that actually does something to the files, right? Process them. So this is step 1, basically pick them up and get them off the server. And step 2 is process them, usually on a different server, right? So let's see how that's done. If we go back to our events and we go to our pickup files event, the pickup files is the one that has the script that simply says grab all the files in the pickup directory, delete them, and attach them to the job, right? That's the job that just ran. If you look down here at the bottom of this screen, you can see there's a job actions list, and we can set actions to run when the job is complete. So in this case, we're saying on success, when the job is complete, we're going to run another event. We're basically chaining an event onto the end. And we have a new event called resize images to S3. You can imagine what this does, right? And so what's going to happen is files that are attached, uploaded at the end of a job, are automatically passed to the next job, no matter how it is triggered to run. So in this case, we're doing a job action, and this new job will get all those files. Let's take a look at this new job. Save our changes here, and then we're going to go to... So here's the resize images to S3 workflow that I was talking about. This is the next thing that's going to trigger after the file is grabbed off the server. And you can trigger this to run on a different server if you want, for example. What we're doing here is we're simply resizing the images using image magic. Every job that runs has a unique temp directory, and your script is CD'd into that directory by default. So all you need to do is basically glob star, like this here, and you can get a list of all the files that are the input files. And here we're just converting them. We're changing the file name slightly by adding a thumb string inside the file name. And then at the end, we're doing the same thing we did before on the other job, where we're uploading files at the end of a job. But this time, we're changing the glob to say -thumb. So we only upload the new files that we resize, not the original ones. And then that passes on to another job, which, as you can guess from the title, it's going to upload to S3. This uses a marketplace plugin called the S3 Toolbox. And the S3 Toolbox allows you to do all sorts of different S3 operations. In this case, we're basically uploading files, and it automatically uses the input files. You don't have to specify a path. It just knows to use the input files if you leave this blank. And we're going to give it a remote path and our bucket name, and that is it. We pre-authenticated this using a secret vault, so this has our AWS creds all encrypted and ready to go. So we'll go ahead and save that, and let's do another test and watch this whole thing run together. Okay, so we're going to run this one more time. I just want to show you, here's the S3 bucket that we have configured, and there are currently no files in it at all. So now we'll watch, and as the minute rolls over here, the alert should fire again, because I've copied up some more images into that directory. It should fire an alert, and then start processing. And this time, there should be additional jobs. As you can see, it spawned additional jobs, the workflow, and also the resize subjob is running. And when the resize subjob completes, it switches to the upload to S3 job, which is the final job at the end, and all the files are being passed into that. And once that's done, everything's all clean. Now, did it actually work? Let's take a look at S3 first. There we go. You have an images folder, and there are 5 images. You'll notice that they all have -thumb because they were all resized. These are the thumbnails, essentially. They're much smaller than the originals. We can also see on our completed jobs here, we have all these different subjobs we can go look at. Here's the workflow, and the workflow did the resize, and then it did the upload, and you can go into each of these individual jobs to see the steps. You can see these are all blurry because these are thumbnail sized, right? These are the smallest ones. They were scaled down to 256 by 256, I believe. So that's basically everything you need to do to use the alert and monitoring system to trigger a remote file processor and process the files onto a different server. The next thing I want to show you is related to this, and that is how to process files without using the monitoring and alerting system at all, but instead using a single workflow. You can do the whole thing with one workflow that's on a trigger. And you may be saying, well, if the workflow runs, every minute and processes files or looks for files and doesn't find any, isn't it going to make a lot of noise? It's going to run the job. You're going to see it running. You're going to see a job in the completed list. It's going to fill up the database with completed jobs. There's a new feature in xyOps called the invisible modifier, or actually it's called, I'm going to rename this to be the right name. It's called the quiet modifier. The quiet modifier is something you can add on to a trigger to run the job silently. It won't be shown in the UI at all. It won't be shown in the upcoming jobs, and it won't be shown while it runs. And when it's done, you can also set it to be ephemeral, so it auto-deletes itself on completion, and you'll never see it. It just kind of runs invisibly in the background. Except you may actually want to see it if it found files, right? If it actually picked up files, you want to be able to see what happened and the process of converting those files. That is something that automatically happens with the quiet modifier. If the job outputs any files, it automatically disables ephemeral and you can be able to see it. Also, if it fails too, that's also an important one. If a job fails and it has ephemeral or hidden mode, those will be disabled so you can actually see it. So the way this is going to work is one single workflow that does everything, but it's going to be scheduled a little bit differently because we're going to use a multiplex controller. Let me explain what that means. Let's go find it now. Okay, so here's our quiet file processor that I told you about. The reason this is better is there's actually multiple reasons. One is that it's one single workflow that can do everything. You don't need to have a separate monitor plugin and then a separate alert and then a separate event. You can kind of do this all in one. The trick, of course, is how to schedule it. So if we zoom in here, you can see that we can schedule any recurring task. You can do it every minute. You can even do it faster than that if you want by using an interval trigger. And also, here's the quiet modifier I talked about. The quiet modifier modifies when a schedule triggers a job, and you can say run it invisibly and run it ephemerally. So it'll never show up in the completed jobs list, and it won't be visible when it runs. And just to note, if you run it by hand, if you run it manually, the quiet modifier doesn't apply. It only applies to scheduled triggers, so when it runs on a schedule. So you can run this by hand and still see the whole output. So the first thing that happens when this workflow runs, either by a trigger or by on-demand, is it runs into this multiplex controller. A multiplex controller will run whatever job is connected to it multiple times in parallel based on how many servers are in the group that it targets. So if you target this node at multiple groups or multiple servers, whatever you want, as long as there's more than one server, then the multiplex controller will launch multiple jobs in parallel. And that's exactly what we want for this, which is a file collector job. This is doing exactly what we did in the other example, where we're basically just looking for files on a pickup directory. And we're saying star inside this directory, so star is a glob pattern. If any files are found, they're uploaded, and we're saying delete true, which will delete them. And that's all we need to put in this job. That's the whole thing. The idea is this runs on every server. In the previous example, monitoring plugins will run on every server by default, or you can set a target for them, a group target. In this case, we're using the multiplex trigger the multiplex controller as the ability to run this on all the servers we want it to run on. And if any files are found, that's where this gets interesting. When this job completes, we have a decision controller here at the end. So each of these jobs is going to run into this decision controller. And the decision controller allows you to use an expression to evaluate to true or false whether or not you want to proceed to the next node in the workflow. In this case, we're saying if there are zero or if there are more than 0 files, then the trigger is set to true and we pass it along to the next one. If not, it just stops right there and doesn't do anything else. So what happens if there are files? Well, it's passed to an action which does a run event. And this is where we can actually process the files. This is where we would do image magic to resize them, upload them to S3, that type of thing. Now, the reason this is done as a run event action like this is because we want to spawn kind of an external job to this workflow. Because remember, this whole workflow, all the way from here and all the way through, is going to be silent. It's going to be quiet and ephemeral, hidden, invisible. We're not going to see it unless files are found. And then what we want to do is we want to run this separately. So when files are found, we run a separate workflow outside of this one. So the whole thing's visible from beginning to end. That's the idea. So let's go ahead and try this. Let's configure this to run, and then we'll watch the whole thing go through. Okay, I've scheduled this to run on the next minute. So let's go ahead and go back to our dashboard. And remember, this is set to run invisibly, so we're not going to see the first job run. We should only see what happens when it actually finds the files and starts processing them. So we should only see the image resize and the S3 job, and those should be happening in just a moment here. There they are. So it's doing the image resize and the resize to S3, but you didn't see anything else at all. There was no preamble. There was no file pickup job or anything like that. It was totally invisible and ephemeral. And when this is done, we should see the images uploaded again. All done. If we look at our completed jobs, we can go into this workflow here. So this is the secondary workflow that ran, and this one is visible. This one is saved into the database, and you can see the different steps. We can go here and look at the actual output. Here they are. The thumbnail images are all there. And if we look at the all completed jobs, we do not see anything else. Our original workflow that went and scanned the images, or excuse me, looked for the files, is not listed here by design, because that's ephemeral, so it's not going to show up in the completed list. Well, that's about all you need to know to do remote file processing in xyOps. There are two different ways to do it, using monitors and alerts, and also using a quiet workflow. If you'd rather read about this, we have a whole wiki on remote file processing, and you can see all the different steps and all the different scripts you need to do this. Very simple, screenshots as well, and check it out. Well, the link to this will be in the description below the video. This has been xyOps, workflow automation and server monitoring. Thank you very much for watching. Have a good day. Bye-bye.